Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Bridge podcast where medicine meets the arts. This podcast is part of our 9-week narrative medicine course where we explore what it means to listen, to read, and to live with more attention. Last week, we looked at story and counterstory with Eve L. Ewing's retellings, how imagination can rewrite loss into restoration. This week, we turn our attention to caregiving and self-care, two words so often spoken in the same breath, yet so rarely in balance. Our close reading text this week was Zdravka Evtimova's Blood of a Mole. It's a story that begins in isolation, ends in connection, and something else, a little darker, a little scarier too. In this story, a lonely shopkeeper discovers that their blood, their literal life force, can bring healing to another. But what begins as an act of generosity also raises some difficult questions. First, what are the limits of care? Second, when does giving become self-erasure? And third, what does it mean to care ethically when the act itself involves deception, sacrifice, or exhaustion? So today I am joined by Dr. Jeremy Dane, who joins us from Ivins, Utah. Jeremy is a family physician and educator who's spent years working in community health centers throughout Southern California and Nevada. He now teaches medical residents in Las Vegas and medical students at an osteopathic school near his home. Outside of medicine, Jeremy is an avid reader, smoothie connoisseur, and proud father of twin kindergartners, Sophia and Jonah, aka Sojo. You might find him dancing to K-pop Demon Hunters with Sojo, watching Abbott Elementary with a spoonful of peanut butter, or running through the Red Rock Canyons of southern Utah. Jeremy, welcome. It's so good to have you here.
You, Julia. Thank you. So happy to be here.
Yeah, welcome. So, in our introductory reading for this week from The Wounded Storyteller, Arthur Frank talked a little bit about spaceship ethics. And Jeremy, you did such an excellent job of describing spaceship ethics in your post and giving us a really cool visual for it too. I was hoping you could talk a little bit about that here. What are spaceship ethics?
Yes, uh, it was really in our writing prompt as well. It was really what I was. It was a tension in the writing prompt that I was trying to convey about, I guess, what we read in terms of the spaceship ethics and how that's kind of the model I've seen most of my career, which is that the suffering that I see or witness in clinical practice is somehow I have to protect myself from it.
Mhm.
I need to that my joy is somehow derived outside of the suffering setting, and that when I'm in clinic and I have patients with chronic pain or patients who are suffering with um, diagnoses that are not yet made or emotional pain, certainly, as well as physical pain, that somehow that is going to seep into my life and I have to separate myself from it. And so the idea of the spaceship is getting in, getting into a kind of ironclad ship that separates me from that suffering and pain. I'm protected from it.
Mhm.
I can get into it. I can go to the clinic. Uh, to some degree, my ventilatory suit is still on as I sort of exit this spaceship, and I continue to protect myself from the suffering. And then I can get back in the ship. I return to home where I can sort of relieve myself of all those protective mechanisms.
Right.
And that, I think it's a common perception and one that I've had. And I guess this week's readings really have me profoundly putting that idea on its head. I guess I've always known it's wrong, but it seems to some degree that it's how I practice.
Mhm.
And I've been sort of changed by this week's reading, and I'm thinking about how I'm going to get rid of the spaceship.
Ooh, interesting. Why?
Yeah. Well, I was really moved by Frank, who is challenging this idea or this term of pedagogy of suffering, of just what suffering has to teach me. And then some of the other philosophers that he and sociologists that he referenced and to support his argument around that 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 where my brokenness or my pain or my loneliness is going to be filled by other people's suffering. And I just I knew that service served us well, and I knew that I I just all the concepts were there about what caregiving can give to yourself. But I've just never thought of it in this depth about how not only can it fulfill me, but it can actually fill me
Mhm.
with joy or meaning or uh, community or uh, I guess tackling loneliness to some degree.
Yeah.
He talks a lot about how it can all do that, and um, I'm just kind of ashamed that the spaceship ethics that this model of care, I've I do that. I've done it, and I want to change that.
So beautifully said. You used the word loneliness a few times, and that's such a great word, I think, to describe this because spaceship ethics, as Arthur Frank writes it, is a very isolating thing, not just for the the patients who are removed from their caregivers in this way, but for the caregivers themselves. It's a lonely thing being in your spaceship, you know?
Yeah.
And for Arthur Frank, the community that you get, in this reciprocal relationship is actually an ontological thing. It's like for him, we are relational beings. We are always already, whether we like it or not, we are in relationship with the world. We are part of the web of existence. We are born into it. And yet, when we pull ourselves out of this web or we think of ourselves as isolated from it, um, we do ourselves a disservice. So things that can pull us back into that intrinsic place of community restore us to ourselves. So I loved that you brought up the isolation effect of the spaceship ethics. Also, you mentioned you've done this. We've all done this. This getting into the spaceship is a defense mechanism, and sometimes it's a necessary one. I noticed a lot of people were talking about it on the boards, like, yeah, spaceship ethics, let's do it. Did you see that? A few people were like, yeah, I'm all about spaceship ethics. It's about self-protection, it's about boundary. And I think Arthur Frank is he's making the distinction not against boundaries.
Mhm.
He's making a distinction against isolation, and seeing yourself as above others or immune from the suffering that others experience. He's saying we're all going to suffer at some point. We're all human. We're all mortal. Lean into it. Yeah, and as we lean in toward each other, and we restore ourselves to that original community, the original web. Um,
Yes.
so yeah.
Yes, and I just like to mention that I think spaceship ethics, as much as the metaphor is very visual in this armor that we create, it's really unseen, certainly in my life, that it's almost a mindset and not anything I feel like any patient would necessarily appreciate I'm doing. Uh, I certainly, I don't actually think I'm doing it very well. If I really am trying to create a barrier, I'm not. But it's kind of the tension that I'm creating that I'm supposed to have spaceship ethics in order to protect myself, while at the same time I'm incapable of it to some degree, um, and that creates I guess I'm not reaping the benefits that Frank is talking about that can be achieved if I just surrender to what what my patients can teach me about suffering or pain, as opposed to telling myself I must protect myself from it. Um, but it is a mindset. It's not there's nothing I can see that would I could point to as evidence of how I'm getting into my spaceship other than just a mindset.
Yeah. Yeah, and that how that mindset lends itself to action is a big question, like what would it look like in a perfect world where you have boundaries, you protect yourself, um, you honor your bandwidth, and at the same time, you surrender to suffering, and you try to learn from the suffering of your patients, uh, you be with them rather than just for them. What would that balance look like? And it's in Arthur Frank, he writes very beautifully and philosophically and idealistically, but it's hard to imagine the lived example of it from a person's, in your position, for example, a clinician who's working every day. I imagine it's a constant struggle to kind of create this ideal in your life. So I think that's where reading a story like Blood of a Mole gets really interesting. So this week we read Zdravka Evtimova's Blood of a Mole, and it's such a fascinating story that I think really puts these theories to the test, and maybe challenges them in some ways. Um, do you do you mind giving us just a high level overview of the plot of this story? What's happening here in this story?
Sure, sure. The story involves a shopkeeper at or a kind of store owner and attendant at a pet store who sells. In the beginning of the story, it's sort of a bit of a bleak setting or bleak picture around the kind of animals sold, which involve bait or um, animals of uh, animals that otherwise utilized are for various purposes other than care or
Right.
domestication or that kind of thing. And sort of the descriptors are that this pet shop owner and the pet shop setting is not painted in the most optimistic or pleasant light. And a patron comes into the shop and is rather desperate, and she's looking for a mole because she needs the blood of a mole to cure her son of his ailments. Implied, I believe, or stated that death is pending for her son, and the shopkeeper feels pretty compelled to somehow help this patron, and he initially says, I don't carry any moles. There's no moles here in which to get blood from. But he has a shift in his, I guess he just feels compelled to help her so much that he decides to take some of his own blood, put it in a vial, and give it to her. She seems to be aware of this, that it was his blood, but she nevertheless takes the blood.
Mhm.
And and over the course of some time, weeks, days to weeks, he or she, I don't think we know the gender of the shopkeeper, but they are in the shop. Things seem to be a little better for the shopkeeper in terms of the descriptors around them, which somehow implies to me that the shopkeeper was sort of transformed by this
Mhm.
giving. The patron returns and says that the son was cured or the ailments have been treated to some degree by the blood. And she's so thankful to the shopkeeper. And the shopkeeper seemed to be pleased with this, very pleased that they could help. And subsequently, another member of the community returns and tries to get blood from the patron in order to help his ailing loved one. And then there seems to be a line outside the door trying to get more blood from the shopkeeper. That's the plot.
Right, right. Yeah. So we end in this like weird place where everything seemed to have been going really well. The shopkeeper was really proud of himself. All of a sudden, he really enjoys his job. I'm using he as well, and I shouldn't. You're right. There's no gender on this shopkeeper. But at the end, suddenly the shop is surrounded by people with knives trying to get their bit of blood from the shopkeeper, and everybody has a sick person at home. So you land in this kind of ethically sticky place that you're trying to figure out, well, where should the boundary have been? And you did a great job, Jeremy, of charting this shopkeeper's transformation from that sterility. The environment of the shop was so dreary at the beginning, so wintry. And suddenly, as the shopkeeper gives the blood, he finds purpose and meaning, and things begin to sparkle. You use great sensory language, glitter, dizzy with happiness. Um, what do you think allows that transformation to occur in the shopkeeper? What inspires that warm glow in the shop?
Yes. Well, presumably, my the act of helping this patron,
Yeah.
the woman who came into the shop, who
Mhm.
was desperate, and there was an intervention of sorts, or there was an act of service.
Mhm.
That is the only thing that I saw
Yeah.
that changed the shopkeeper's perspective in how they described the surroundings that reflected this sort of joy or this sort of altered mood that came with giving the patron what she needed and wanted,
Right.
which is kind of a kind of the rub there is the shopkeeper gave her what she wanted, and was that the right thing to do? It's a
Mm-hmm.
bit of an ethical question there,
Hmm.
um, which certainly plays out in that ending with the line in the knives is, was it the right thing to do in the first place? But it does carry some sort of meaning to me that there was a service or a caregiver act of
Yeah.
sorts. And this,
Yeah. This is no, man in a spaceship, refusing to get off
yes,
the high horse, or or even somebody who's, pure charity. Arthur Frank talked about that too, the way that sometimes thinking of yourself as a charitable person who is here benevolently to help the suffering from which you are immune, it can be just as damaging as somebody who's not willing to help at all, because you see yourself as above, and you're forgetting your own intrinsic mortality and capacity for suffering, and you miss out on all the lessons that are right there for you too. But
yes.
the shopkeeper's not just doing a charity service, I don't think, at least. I guess you could read it in that way. I get the sense that he really wants to help. He really genuinely, doesn't see himself as, uh, trying to make himself feel better about this situation by just giving the blood. Like, he really feels badly for this woman, and see, it seems genuine, and the connection between them seems genuine too. And yet, you brought up a great point. You said something still falls short here.
Mhm.
This is not quite the pedagogy of suffering as Arthur Frank was describing it. You said you're uncertain whether the shopkeeper recognizes the reciprocity of exchange. And that, I thought, was such an insightful tension. And I thought maybe we could talk about that uncertainty.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah, and I was referring to Frank's mention, and I don't know if he was referring to one of the other sociologists around this reciprocity, that this idea that if you're aware of how the sufferer the sufferer has to teach you, and that the whole act of
Hmm.
caregiver and care and receiver
Hmm.
is has reciprocity as part of its foundation,
Yeah.
then to some degree that meets the requirements of this ethical relationship and um, this pedagogy of suffering that Frank is referring to. That's part of it. That's a requirement
Hmm.
in the meaning and joy, for lack of a better word, the meaning and joy and fulfillment that giving and caretaking can give the giver.
Hmm.
Give the giver.
Right. Right. Yeah. Do you feel like the shopkeeper is not getting is not actually receiving as much as he's giving here, or is not picking up on some lessons? What is not reciprocal in your mind?
That's a great okay. And I think that was the struggle I had. It was, it was only going back through it was I think the heart of my question here is who was and there was Phi. Does she go by Fiona or Fee or Phi?
I'm not sure. I've
Okay.
been calling her Fee. I don't know.
Fee. Okay,
We'll
Fee.
ask her. We'll ask her next time. Yeah. She has great
Thank you. Yes,
insight.
Fee. And you get a great comment to Fee's post, which was this question of who is it helping, right?
Right, right.
And I I realized, and when I initially wrote my comments about that reciprocitous nature of the relationship, I knew something wasn't right, and I didn't know what it was, and it was Fee that, and then your comments to Fee that I had an epiphany that yes, was he who was it for? Was he just so desperate to somehow make himself feel better for this woman uh, that he had to do something, and it wasn't necessarily for her,
Mm.
but it was for him.
Ooh.
Be and I I'm not sure if I have anything to point to as evidence of that. It could have just been a genuine um empathy and compassion for this woman that was completely independent of his need to feel better about the situation. But there was, but I guess I've been in that situation where I promise things or I do things that I think aren't rooted in honesty
Mhm.
or rooted in an ethical act, potentially could be criticized as unethical, in that it might have a deceptive piece to it, in order to somehow fulfill my need of doing something. And uh, maybe just my word choice or how I'm sort of framing an illness or how I'm framing the discussion that's sort of trying to instill hope in both of us, but doesn't necessarily toe the line in a complete ethical, not ethical, I guess, complete honesty about the situation. And maybe I have an example. I should think of one. Um, but I guess when I read Fee's post, I actually reposted saying, well, um, I have the experience of, gosh, I lost my train of thought of what I was going to say. You had said that when you've had some situations where you've said to a patient that something to make yourself feel better.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that it didn't necessarily do what it you had hoped it would do for the patient. And that's the phenomenon that I'm wondering, it worked out in this case, but ultimately it could have worked out very poorly for both the woman and and her son. It could have gone really wrong. And that's where my questions lie.
Beautifully said. And I love how you did all of that without actually, you know, boxing us into like an ethic of this is how it should work every single time. This is what it should have looked like. Because I don't think that's what the story is trying to do. I think the story is really just trying to um, muddy the waters and show just how impossible it is to be all things to all people, but at the same time to do a meaningful act. And as you're talking, I'm reminded of this kind of, I think, very American uh, ethic toward fixing, like you just want to fix it. You want to the problem to go away. And sometimes you say things in an effort to fix, that are not true. And you brought up a great word earlier that I wrote and I put boxes around earlier because it was such a great word, surrender. You, I think
Mm,
fixing and surrendering are on two ends of a spectrum here. And I wonder what would have happened if instead of rushing to cut his arm open and give the lady what she was asking for, the blood of a mole, which is really the shopkeeper's own blood.
mhm.
Instead of that deception, what if he had just sat with her and said, "Tell me what's going on?" Like just sat with her, surrendered, been with her, let her cry, given her a shoulder, something instead of jumping to the fix, you
Julia, absolutely.
yeah, yeah, you asked, who is this helping, right? Maybe just giving the blood of a mole, it certainly hurts to do that, but maybe it hurt less than, you know, uh, being unable to help. That he wanted so badly to help that he's willing to sacrifice his body to do it.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
when maybe
Yeah.
maybe just surrender would have been a more ethical thing. And you also mentioned that this well-intentioned deception, it's not just it's not just ethically bad. It does instill hope in both parties, and hope can be
Yes.
powerful, powerful medicine.
Yes.
Placebos
Yes.
work. That's the funny part. Like placebos actually work. And that
Yes.
brings up a whole new realm of, ethical quandary for us, especially I don't know if
Yes.
you probably picked this up so far. This course was originally designed for pain care providers. I mean, what's not pain care, right? So, and I think it applies to, all of humanity. But in pain care, we talk a lot about the placebo effect and how that can be a huge determinant of pain. There's something called DIMS and SIMS. Are you familiar with this term? Um, DIMS, it's an
And
acronym for
Sims, no.
DIMS is an acronym for danger in me, and SIMS is an acronym for safety in me. And in pain care, we talk about DIMS and SIMS. Uh, a danger in me could be, I don't. I'm hungry. I don't feel supported by my family right now. I don't know what's wrong in my body. I don't know how long this is going to go on for me. All of these things can increase pain because it increases our felt sense of danger. But things that create a sense of safety in us, I do feel really supported right now. I feel nourished. I feel hopeful. I know what's wrong with me. I have a plan, I've got a great team of healthcare providers. All these things create safety and lessen pain. So pain is not merely nociceptive, it's also this kind of whole, it's influenced by all of these other factors that create either a sense of danger and safety. So hope would be a sim. And it's interesting how some things can be dims and sims depending on how you look at it. Like diagnosis, for example, could be a dim. It could be like, ah, crap, like now I got this
Yes.
thing. Or it could be, hey, I finally know what's wrong, and now I can do the research on how to fix it. So it's a very slippery slope in pain care when you're speaking in sim terms to somebody to try to instill feelings of hope. I mean, when I say things like this pain is not going to be here forever, it's not. Your body is going to heal itself. Bodies are healing machines. This is not always going to stick around. I don't know that. I don't know that for real. But
I
I
think
say
that's where
it
I was trying to
with
go
terms.
earlier, Julia. Thank you.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. So what do
Hmm.
we do with this? I agree with you. It's so how do we create an ethic out of this?
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. It's, I think that perhaps there's no easy answer, but your suggestion of what the shopkeeper could have alternatively done,
Mhm.
of sitting with the patient and asking more questions about what's going on. Oh, I think that's beautiful. And that is it's also yeah, thinking of the practicalities in a busy clinical practice and the time that so much of this requires, which I would love to do. And I don't even, I've heard this so many times from other, clinicians and excusing away why some of this can't happen because of the time constraints. But it is absolutely the kind of physician and caretaker I would strive to be over the hope, over just the hope.
Yeah,
Or
absolutely.
how could I do both ethically?
Hmm. Yeah. I have a good friend who is a physician, and she has told me the story before of a woman who repeatedly came to her. She was a breast cancer survivor, and all her markers looked good. She was in remission. Everything seemed fine, but the woman kept coming back, kept coming back. I think I feel a lump here. Like there was just a lot of anxiety around a recurrence. And finally, my friend sat down with her and said, I'm happy to keep, running tests as long as you need. We can every time you come in, I'll check you and we'll do the best, we can to make sure you're still in the clear. But do you want to talk about your deeper anxieties here? Do you want to tell me, what you think is at the root of this fear? And they got to have a really open conversation around, just fear of mortality and really what it might be like at the end of somebody's life. Are you going to have family around you? Are you not? And this seems so far from the field that we've chosen in healthcare. It seems like it's verging on psychotherapy, and I think at points it is absolutely called for to refer somebody, to see a psychotherapist. But I think there's also just something so human about sitting with somebody else and talking about deeper fears and perhaps shared fears. We talked. I saw some people talking about this on the boards too. Like sometimes I just want to say, hey, listen, this year I was worried I was going to die too. Like there's shared anxiety here. You're not alone.
Yes.
Let's get through this crazy life together. Um,
Yes. Yes. And it just has me thinking about one barrier that I often brush against in terms of these deeper conversations with my patients around their suffering and their pain is invariably I'm in this role of, I guess, what Arthur Frank, I think he was talking early on about sort of modern medicine or the the re, the repay the restitution story the restitution story of medicine, that I'm in this role of I can help you with the restitution story, that I have the keys, or I have the test, or I have the intervention that will help you.
Mhm.
And psychotherapists or social workers or family, or someone else is in the arena of helping you process your pain or process your suffering. But when you're with me, I can fulfill the restitution story. And so it's sort of we're on that train, we're on that track.
Yeah.
And when I try to introduce ancillary components in the physician role outside of the restitution story of we have the answer, modern medicine has the answer for you, it isn't always received, or I haven't yet how to fish. If I ask a patient, so what does this pain mean to you, or
Oh,
something really deep, they'll just, they're like, what? No.
yeah. Yeah, yeah. No, I totally understand you. And sometimes I feel like this all of this study and practice that we do in narrative medicine, 9 times out of 10, it's for us. Not not anything that we're going to bring into, a clinical setting any more than just by virtue of learning how to pay attention and how to listen for detail, you know. But I think 9 times
Mhm.
out of 10, it's just the one that we are restoring, that we're really restituting is ourselves. And restitution, it's so funny. That's such a great word. Thank you for bringing that up from Frank. Restitution is another word for fixing, right? And that's our job. That's your job I'm just in massage and yoga therapy. I don't have to do much, other than, feely stuff. But when you're working as a primary care provider and people come to you with problems with their bodies, they want you to have the answer. They don't want to just talk to you about their feelings. They want some restitution from you. So on one hand, it's a part of your job to be the one who knows. And on the other hand, that's a lot of freaking pressure to always be the one who knows. And especially when you don't, when things are still question marks. And and there's a danger there too in turning you into this automaton, this robot who just fixes on an assembly line and shunts people forward. And and I hope that even if you don't talk to patients about this kind of thing, just talking about it here in this space gives you permission to feel and to be human and to not have to be
Does.
the one who knows all the time, and 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 to be uncertain in this wonderful way so that you can be human too. Um,
Does, Julia. That's why I'm so in love with this course. Yeah, it really does. It
great,
really, really does. And
great.
it helps me meditate. There was an kind of another point that Frank mentioned about that. I'm also this rest. It's a narrative, or the story, the restitution story, or my role in it is also defined by the medical community. It's defined by the profit driven medical model. And that is something I can work to uh,
Yeah,
work against, or I can sort of redefine, because
yeah.
it's been sort of thrust upon me, and somehow the work I should be pushing back in order to change this profit driven model of medicine.
Okay, so that brings me to a really tough question, and I apologize in advance for it. How how do you do that in your life? What practices, personal, creative, spiritual, help you push back against that, physician as robot, or that consumer model of medicine so that you can maintain a balance between connection and boundary, Like what practices do you have personally or professionally that keep you alive?
April, the bridge for one.
Good.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. It's why I'm here and why I've enjoyed it so much. It really does heal me. And this is kind of the only thing I can think that I do right now, which has been so worth it and so helpful. The other thing I thought about going back to Frank's work is he sort of taught in our excerpt at the end. He was referring to, I believe, another sociologist that was talking about the importance of recognizing that the model, this model of healthcare that I'm enmeshed in is no matter what we do, it's political, and I have to do something. I have to recognize the political or um,
Yeah.
I guess outside of the political or the I guess where disparities and politics align with it. And I was thinking maybe if I was to be more proactive in that arena, that
Mm.
would be therapeutic for me as part of pushing back against this model of care. So
Oh,
that's one of my goals.
oh, that's such a great point. I had a teacher once who blew my mind with something similar, like when I was freaking out over, a term paper, I just felt overwhelmed by it. And he's like, "Well, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing? Are you just like indulging yourself in anxiety right now, or are, are you writing? Are you actually doing the thing that you're so worried about?" Because a huge part of anxiety is just feeling like you have no power. And the more you can reclaim agency and do stuff with it, the more empowered you feel. That's
Yes.
such a great point. I'm just curious, how would you be proactive politically? What kind of things would you get involved in?
Well, it's so funny you're thank you for asking because it just so happens that my medical students are I have such great hope for medicine in the future because of medical students. They're so optimistic and recognize the problems and see see where change is possible. They just got a grant to run this night clinic for it's our local volunteer clinic, and they're now doing an evening clinic with for patients who are underinsured or uninsured, um, and they're using it as sort of a test site or a pilot study around compassion building and how to integrate that into primary care, better integrate it into primary care, how to instill it. And I don't know yet how we're going to do it, but I think that, if depending on how it goes, writing it up, sort of sharing it with our local healthcare big players. I think that sort of incremental small change is their hope, and it's given me hope where I probably had none prior to that. I see that their work has potential to really infiltrate primary care outside of just this evening volunteer clinic and potentially into Intermountain Health and Revere Health, possibly. That's their mission, and it's like, okay, great. You're so ambitious and that's wonderful, and you see the potential for this getting out there and people seeing it and recognizing it and changing the industry. So that's that's where I'm turning, especially in light of Frank's mention toward the end of our excerpt around the political and
Mm,
geopolitical and racial despair, all the things that we have to that need to be thought about in terms of access and healthcare equality.
mm.
It has me thinking, okay, this is a place for it. Great. Let's do it.
Yes. Yes, I love that. Yeah, because he says, you know, these this idea that you come to work in a spaceship assumes that the planet that you're going to is not yours. It's a different planet than the one you come from. Um, Meanwhile, physicians do and should create that world of medicine. In an ideal world, they are the prime movers of medicine, and it doesn't always work out that way. And the idea of stepping into that kind of ownership and doing the best you can to make it a better system, I think it sounds extraordinarily empowering. Your students are up to such amazing things. You are up to such amazing things. I can't wait to see where you go with all of this. Uh,
Thanks, Julia.
Thank you, Jeremy Dane. And is there anything else that you want to talk about, just as far as caregiving and self-care goes, or about Evtimova's Blood of a Mole?
Oh boy, I don't think we did not even unpack 10% of what
I
that
know.
story could really,
Right.
as far reaching as it is in so many aspects. Um, I, I think I think any other big concepts, I guess I'll have to leave for another day. I think we touched on some good ones. And you're so insightful and such a wonderful interview with Julia. Thank you.
Back at you. I'm gonna close with one last personal question, if you don't mind. Why did you get into medicine?
Hmm. I was in a resident interview one time, and that question comes up a bit, and I started to get a little in the clouds about it, about how medicine sort of touches the most, personal and intimate parts of all of our lives, including my own. And I remember the resident interviewer saying, "Okay, we're a little up in the clouds here. Can we kind of bring it down a little bit? Just tell me why you want to go into medicine. You don't need to get philosophical about it." But nevertheless, but it sort of still stands that I always wanted sort of what compels me is meaning making in all its various capacities. And I think everyone in narrative medicine wants that. And it's rich. It's rich. That landscape in healthcare is rich for making meaning of one's life
Hmm.
and and the reciprocity of making meaning for others. So that was always the drive. I wasn't, I was an English lit major when in undergrad, and science wasn't like so many of the biology majors and that come into medical school. It wasn't my first language, but that was why I wanted to be in medicine because of this exact landscape that we're talking about, that it really enriches my life and makes life seem more worthwhile and rich. So that's, I guess, my answer.
I couldn't think of a better answer. Thank you so much, Jane. And thank you for everybody who's listening and for being a part of the Bridge podcast where medicine meets the arts. Next week, we will close our course with the embodied storyteller, asking how stories live not just in our words, but in our gestures, our voices, and our bodies themselves. Thank you again, Jeremy. See you soon.
You, Julia.